Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Nina had never meant to eavesdrop. She only wanted to swing by General Hospital to drop off a file for the Crimson Charity collaboration. But when she turned the corner near the conference room and heard Portia's anxious whisper, she froze, because the name she heard was one that stopped her breath cold. Trina. Nina didn't move. Portia's voice trembled in a way Nina had never heard before, and that alone was enough to root her in place, hidden just behind the doorframe. Inside, Portia paced across the room, her arms tightly crossed around herself as if she were trying to hold her heartbeat together. I can't keep this going. It's spiraling, she murmured. If this ever comes out, everything will blow up. Curtis, Trina. They'll never forgive me. Nina leaned in instinctively. Her pulse picked up speed. Portia was hiding something deeply personal, something explosive. She knew Portia had a protective streak when it came to her daughter, but this sounded different. This wasn't a simple maternal worry. This was fear, guilt, maybe even panic. A second voice answered, Elizabeth. Portia, listen to me. I'm not judging, but you've been carrying this alone for months. You have to tell someone. You can't just bury this and pretend it won't come out. Portia shook her head fiercely. No. If I tell the truth now, after everything that's happened, the attack, the recovery, the strain on our marriage, it'll destroy him. Curtis is finally getting his life back. I can't be the one to shatter it again. Nina's breath caught. The truth? What truth? She couldn't leave. She couldn't make a sound. She pressed closer. Elizabeth spoke gently. Curtis and Trina deserve honesty. And what about me? Portia whispered, her voice breaking. Do I deserve to lose everything? Do I deserve to have my daughter hate me? Because she will. She absolutely will. Nina's stomach twisted. She couldn't stand hearing the raw fear in Portia's voice, but she also couldn't stop listening. Elizabeth sighed. Just tell me one more time. You're absolutely sure? There's no chance the results were contaminated? No chance it was misread. Portia covered her face. I checked 3 times. 3 different labs. All the same. Nina felt a chill crawl down her spine. Elizabeth hesitated. Portia, you have to tell them Trina isn't. Before Elizabeth could finish, Nina's phone buzzed loudly inside her purse. The sound shattered the moment. Inside the room, Portia whipped around. Her eyes were wide, terrified. Elizabeth moved toward the door. Nina stepped back, scrambling. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Nina. Portia's voice was sharp, full of dread. How long were you standing there? Nina held up her hands. I swear I wasn't trying to listen. I came to drop off paperwork and I heard my phone. Portia stepped forward. Tell me the truth. What did you hear? Nina swallowed. She could lie. She could pretend she only heard her name or a stray sentence. But Portia's expression, fragile, frightened, made the lie stick in Nina's throat. I heard you say something about Trina. And Curtis. And Truth. Nina confessed quietly. Portia's face drained of color. Oh God. Elizabeth put a hand on Portia's shoulder. It's okay. It's Nina. She won't. But Nina could see panic overtaking Portia. She wasn't okay. She wasn't close to okay. Portia whispered. You can't say anything. Please. Nina, if you have any compassion in your heart, you can't repeat this. Nina nodded, shaken. I won't. But, Portia, what are you hiding? Portia closed her eyes. I can't. Elizabeth interrupted gently. Portia, if she overheard part of it, maybe she should know the context. At least enough to understand why this can't get out. Portia sank into a chair. It's not something people can kind of know, Elizabeth. It's all or nothing. Nina moved closer, speaking softly. Whatever it is, it's eating you alive. Portia shook her head. That doesn't mean anyone else needs to suffer with me. Nina stayed quiet. She'd been in that place before. The place where secrets poisoned every breath. She knew what it did to a person. And she could see it doing the same to Portia. She pulled up a chair. Portia, look at me. I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to spread anything. I know how it feels to hold something you wish you could undo. So if talking helps, I'm here. Portia looked up, startled. Why are you being kind to me? Because I know what desperation looks like, Nina said softly. I've lived it. Elizabeth watched them, cautiously hopeful. Portia took a deep breath. You can't repeat any of this. Not to Curtis. Not to Trina. Not to anyone. Not yet. Nina nodded. You have my word. Portia stared down at her shaking hands. The secret I'm hiding. It changes everything. It's about Trina. About her paternity. Nina felt the air leave her lungs. Her paternity? I thought that was settled. Curtis is her father. Portia shook her head slowly. He might not be. Nina blinked in shock. What? Portia, you told Curtis. I lied, Portia blurted out. I lied because I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought giving Curtis hope, giving Trina the stability she needed, would heal us all. But Curtis deserved the truth. And so did she. Elizabeth added quietly. Portia recently redid the test. More than once. Portia's lips trembled. And every single result came back the same. Nina spoke carefully. Portia. Who is Trina's biological father? Portia's eyes glistened with tears. Marcus. Taggart was always her father. I never should have doubted it. The first test, the one that suggested Curtis might be her father, it wasn't wrong. But it wasn't complete. There was contamination in the initial sample. I didn't know until months later. By then everything had changed. Curtis had hope. Trina had a sense of belonging she never had before. And I didn't want to take that away. Nina rubbed her forehead. So all this time you've known? Portia nodded, her voice breaking. And I didn't say anything. I thought I'd tell Curtis once he recovered, once life calmed down, once Trina was settled. But every day I waited made it harder. And now? If I come forward I look like a liar. A manipulator. They'll see me as the woman who played with their lives. Elizabeth crouched beside her. You didn't mean to deceive them. But I did deceive them. Portia snapped, then wilted. And the longer I hide it, the worse it gets. Nina took a breath. What about Trina? Does she know? Portia shook her head. No. And she deserves to. But she's so happy with Curtis. Their bond is finally strong. Finally healing after everything with the shooting. She finally feels like she has two fathers who love her. And to rip that away now. Nina understood too well. You're scared she'll never forgive you. Yes, Portia whispered. She trusted me. And I broke that trust. Nina felt a twinge of empathy so sharp it surprised her. Portia, I think you've suffered enough alone. But you can't keep this locked inside forever. It will come out. They always do. Secrets like this, they have a way of blowing holes through everything when they finally surface. Portia wiped her eyes. What would you do? Nina paused, the weight of her own past heavy on her shoulders. I would tell the truth before someone else discovers it. Because the fallout is worse when you're caught. Portia looked at her, devastated but thoughtful. I don't know if I can. Elizabeth squeezed Portia's hand. You don't have to do it today. But soon. You can't keep this inside much longer. Portia took a shaky breath. Nina. You swear you won't tell anyone? Nina nodded firmly. I swear. But once she left the room, Nina's heart raced. Curtis deserved the truth. So did Trina. But she had promised Portia. And Nina Reeves, after all her mistakes, was determined not to be the one to blow up someone else's life. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the secret was already slipping through Portia's fingers, like sand she could no longer hold. Later that day, Nina crossed the Metro Court lobby only to run straight into Curtis himself. He smiled warmly. Nina, hey. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world. Nina froze for half a second too long. Curtis frowned. Everything okay? Nina forced a smile. Just a long day. Curtis tilted his head. You sure? You seem tense. Nina swallowed. I'm fine. Really. But Curtis kept his eyes on her, as though he sensed she was keeping something back. And Nina prayed he'd never ask the one question she couldn't answer. Across town, Portia sat alone in her office, staring at the test results she'd hidden in a locked drawer. 3 identical reports. 3 undeniable truths. She whispered to herself, it's only a matter of time. And she was right. Because secrets in Port Charles never stayed buried. Not for long. Portia's phone buzzed with a message from Curtis. "Dinner tonight? Want to talk about the future?" She closed her eyes, tears spilling over. Because she knew, if she said yes, she'd be walking into a lie. If she said no, he'd grow suspicious. And sooner or later, Nina would crack under the pressure of what she knew. Or Elizabeth would. Or the truth would slip another way. Portia looked at the ceiling, voice cracking. What have I done? Meanwhile, Nina sat alone at the bar in the Metro Court, staring at her untouched drink. She thought about her promise. Thought about Curtis's smile. Thought about Trina. Sweet, loyal, hopeful Trina, who deserved the truth more than anyone. Nina whispered to herself, I shouldn't know this. I shouldn't be part of this. But now she was. And she couldn't unhear it. Nor could she unsee the devastation that would come when the truth finally exploded. Because it would. Secrets like these always did. And Portia's terrible mistake was about to pull all of Port Charles into the fallout she had tried so desperately to prevent. The opulent living room of the Quartermain mansion was too still, the usual clamor of familial chaos replaced by a silence that felt heavy and watchful. Nina Reeves stood by the grand piano, her fingers tracing the intricate inlay without truly seeing it. She had come to discuss a potential charity event with Tracy, but the matriarch had been called away on a sudden, urgent phone call, leaving Nina to wait. A quiet sigh escaped her. Her life, once a tempest of dramatic confrontations and fraught relationships, had settled into a semblance of peace. A hard-won peace built on a foundation of truth, or so she had believed. Her marriage to Sonny Corinthos, while complex, was stable. Her relationship with her daughter Willow was finally blossoming. The ghosts of her past, the lies about Nellie's identity, the secret of Wiley's paternity, seemed to have been laid to rest. She had confessed, she had atoned, and she was moving forward. A soft, mechanical whir from the hallway broke her reverie. It was the sound of the private elevator that served the wing of the house containing the study and several private suites. Curiosity pricked at her. She knew that elevator was rarely used. Most guests took the main staircase. Thinking Tracy might have returned via another entrance, Nina moved toward the hallway, her heels sinking soundlessly into the thick Persian rug. As she neared the corner, she heard the distinct, muffled click of a door closing, followed by the rapid, light tread of retreating footsteps. Not Tracy's assured stride. This was quicker, almost skittish. Peering around the edge of the wall, she caught just a glimpse of a familiar, stylish silhouette vanishing through the service entrance into the garden. Portia Robinson. Nina's eyebrows knitted. What was Willow's other mother doing here, using the private elevator, and leaving in such apparent haste? It was odd but not alarming. Portia was a doctor at General Hospital. Perhaps she'd been making a house call to one of the live-in staff. Yet, the furtiveness of the exit lingered in Nina's mind. She was about to turn back to the living room when her eyes fell on a small, glinting object on the floor just beside the elevator doors. A necklace. She walked over and bent to pick it up. It was a delicate gold chain with a single teardrop-shaped citron pendant. She recognized it instantly. It was Portia's. She'd complimented her on it just last week at a lunch with Willow. The clasp was broken. Nina held the cool metal in her palm. She should just leave it on the hall table with a note. But something, that old, relentless instinct that had driven so many of her past investigations, the part of her that could never let a mystery lie, pulled her in another direction. The elevator doors had just closed. Portia had just stepped out. The necklace must have fallen in that moment. And she had come from upstairs. Nina glanced around. The house was silent. Before she could talk herself out of it, she reached out and pressed the call button. The doors slid open with a quiet whisper. She stepped inside. The elevator was small, paneled in rich mahogany with only 2 buttons, G for ground and S for study. Portia had come from the study level. The ascent was brief. When the doors opened again, she was in a small, book-lined anteroom that led to the Quartermain study, one of the most private sanctuaries in the house, a place where empires were built and destroyed over glasses of brandy. The door to the study itself was slightly ajar. Nina's pulse, which had been steady, began a low, insistent drumbeat in her ears. This was a trespass. A serious one. Tracy would be furious. Sonny would call it reckless. Willow would be disappointed. But the citron pendant felt heavy in her clenched fist. and the image of Portia's hurried escape was burned into her mind. "Hello," she called out softly, pushing the study door open a little wider. "Tracy." No answer. The room was empty, bathed in the late afternoon sun that streamed through the tall windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. The colossal desk was tidy, the leather chairs empty. Everything looked perfectly in order. Yet the air felt charged, as if the very molecules were vibrating with a recently departed energy. Nina took a few steps inside, her eyes scanning. Nothing seemed out of place. Then her gaze fell on the large, old-fashioned filing cabinet in the corner. Its top drawer was not fully closed. A sliver of dark space gaped between the drawer and the cabinet frame. Driven by a force she could not name, Nina crossed the room. She tugged the drawer open. It moved smoothly, well-oiled. Inside were hanging files, neatly labeled in Tracy's precise hand. Property deeds, tax records, corporate filings. Her fingers trailed over the tabs. Then at the very back her hand stilled. A file thicker than the others with no label. She pulled it out. It was a plain manila folder. As she opened it, a sheaf of documents met her eyes, along with a few old photographs. The top document was a birth certificate. Her eyes skimmed the details, a habit from her days running crimson. Name Tricia Robinson. Date of birth: March 15, 1992. Mother Portia Robinson. Father. The name was typed clearly, unmistakably. Curtis Ashford. Nina's breath hitched. Curtis? Portia and Curtis had a child? A daughter? This was news, certainly a secret from their past, but not necessarily a terrible one. Many people had children from prior relationships. But why was this hidden? Why was this document, concerning a woman in her 30s now, locked in Tracy Quartermain's private file cabinet? She flipped to the next page. It was a death certificate. Tricia Robinson. Date of death: March 17, 1992. Cause of death: complications from congenital heart defect. A 2-day-old baby. Nina's heart clenched in sympathy. A private, profound tragedy for Portia. A loss she had evidently never spoken of, not to her daughter TJ, nor to anyone in Port Charles as far as Nina knew. This explained the secrecy the pain held close. It was sad, deeply sad, but still, why here? Why in this file? She looked at the photographs. One was a grainy hospital image of a newborn, tiny and swaddled, with tubes obscuring her face. Another was a candid shot of a young Portia, her eyes holding a world of sorrow, looking down at the bundle in her arms. A third photograph was of a young man, handsome, smiling widely at the camera. It took Nina a moment to place him. It was a much younger Curtis, but not as she knew him. This was Curtis from decades ago, from a life before Port Charles. Then her eyes fell on the last document in the file. It was a notarized affidavit dated just a few months ago. The heading made her blood run cold. Affidavit of paternity dispute and intent to seek restitution. She began to read, her eyes darting across the legal jargon. The affidavit, filed by a third-party attorney on behalf of a client listed only as Jr., contested the paternity listed on Tricia Robinson's birth certificate. It cited new, alleged DNA evidence and witness testimony from a retired nurse who had been present at the birth in Florida. It claimed that Curtis Ashford was not, in fact, the biological father of the child born to Portia Robinson on March 15, 1992. The words blurred for a second before Nina forced herself to focus. If not Curtis, then who? The affidavit pointed toward another man, a man whose identity was redacted in the copy, but whose potential financial and social standing was implied to be significant. The restitution sought was not merely child support for a deceased child, but damages for fraudulent misrepresentation of paternity and intentional infliction of emotional distress, citing a statute of limitations that had been told due to alleged concealment. Nina's mind was reeling. This was a legal threat, a potentially explosive one, but it was still a private matter between Portia, Curtis, and this mysterious Jr. Why was Tracy involved? Why was this file here? She flipped the affidavit over. Paperclipped to the back was a single, handwritten note on Tracy Quartermain's personal stationery. The script was furious, slashing. It read, "Confirmed. The timeline matches. The redacted name is him. Portia has known for 30 years. She lied to Curtis, and she has been lying to everyone ever since. This is not just a paternity secret. This is a secret that could unravel everything for my family. We contain this. We buy this JR off, we bury it, and we make sure Portia understands the price of her silence forever. For the sake of my brother's legacy, and for the future of this family. Tracy's brother. Legacy. A cold, sickening comprehension began to dawn in Nina's gut, slow and horrifying, like a creature rising from the depths. Tracy's brother was Edward Quartermain, but that didn't fit. Then her mind, making frantic, terrible connections, landed on the other brother. The one who was not a Quartermain by blood but by marriage, the one who had been entwined with the family for decades, whose legacy was inextricably linked to theirs. For the sake of my brother's legacy. Not Edward. Alan Quartermain. Dr. Alan Quartermain. Honored, beloved, deceased surgeon of General Hospital. Husband to Monica. Father to Jason, Drew and AJ. The room seemed to tilt. Nina gripped the edge of the desk, the polished wood cool against her sweating palm. The dates, the redacted name, the extreme measures of containment hinted at in Tracy's note. It couldn't be. It was too monstrous, too devastating. But the logic was inescapable. A paternity secret from 30 years ago, involving Portia, that Tracy believed could unravel everything for the Quartermains. A secret so catastrophic it required buying off a blackmailer and threatening Portia into eternal silence. A secret connected to Alan. Nina's thoughts flew to the present. To Trina Robinson. Portia's vibrant, wonderful daughter. The young woman who was the light of Portia's life, who was dating Spencer Cassadine, who was like a sister to Willow. Trina, who believed Curtis Ashford was her biological father. Curtis, who believed Trina was his daughter. Their relationship, recently rebuilt after initial turmoil, was a cornerstone of both their lives. If the man redacted in that affidavit was Alan Quartermain, then Trina was not Curtis's daughter. She was a Quartermain, a half-sister to Jason, Drew and the late AJ. A blood relation to the sprawling, powerful, deeply dysfunctional dynasty that dominated Port Charles. An heir to a fortune and a history of madness and malice. And Portia had known. For all of Trina's life she had known. She had let Curtis believe he was a father. She had let Trina believe Curtis was her dad. She had watched Curtis struggle with his identity, with his relationships, all while carrying this apocalyptic truth. Oh my God! Nina whispered into the silent room, the sound swallowed by the weight of the revelation. This was far worse than any secret she had ever kept. Her lies about Wiley's paternity had been born of momentary, desperate panic. This was a 30-year architecture of deception. It was a lie that formed the bedrock of multiple lives. The consequences began to unfold in her mind like a series of detonations. Trina's entire identity shattered. Curtis betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. His entire sense of self, his understanding of his own history and his connection to his child obliterated. The Quartermains thrown into chaos, Monica's grief at Alan's infidelity resurrected, Jason and Drew discovering a secret sister, the legal battles over the estate. The ripple effect would touch everyone. Spencer, who loved Trina, TJ, who would learn his mother had lived a double life, Willow, whose connection to Trina would now be fraught with this colossal family secret. And Portia. Respected Dr. Portia Robinson, pillar of the community, would be seen as the greatest deceiver in Port Charles history. Her career, her relationships, her very standing in town would evaporate. The shame would be unimaginable. Nina understood now why Tracy was involved. This wasn't just about protecting Portia, or even about protecting Alan's memory. It was about protecting the Quartermain empire from a scandal that could destabilize it legally and socially. Tracy was in full damage control mode, using the Quartermain wealth and influence to silence the blackmailer and ensure Portia's continued complicity. We make sure Portia understands the price of her silence forever. The menace in those words was palpable. A wave of nausea washed over Nina. She had to get out of this room. She shoved the documents back into the folder, her hands trembling. She fumbled, almost dropping it. She managed to get it into the drawer and push it closed, the soft thunk sounding like a gunshot in the quiet. She stumbled back into the elevator, pressing the G button repeatedly, as if speed could outrun the knowledge now seared into her brain. As the doors closed on the study floor, she caught her reflection in the polished brass. She looked pale, haunted. She saw in her own eyes the look of someone who had peered into an abyss and seen something she could never forget. The elevator descended. The cool necklace chain was still biting into her palm. She had forgotten she was holding it. Back in the deserted hallway, she placed the citron pendant carefully on the hall table. She could not face Portia. Not now. Not with this inside her. She had to think. She had to process. She left the Courtemain mansion without waiting for Tracy, her mind a cyclone of conflict. She walked aimlessly, the manicured gardens of the estate blurring into a green smear. Her first instinctive thought was of Willow. Her daughter had suffered so much from secrets, from Nina's own secrets, from Harmony's lies, from the confusion over Wiley. Willow valued truth above all else now, having been so poisoned by falsehoods. What would she think if she knew her other mother was harboring a lie of this magnitude? Would it destroy their fragile newfound bond? And then there was Sonny. Sonny, who had his own complicated history with secrets and with the Courtemains. Sonny, who valued loyalty but also understood the corrosive nature of lies. Would he tell her to expose it? To go to Curtis? Or would he, with his pragmatic, sometimes ruthless understanding of power, advise caution? This secret was a live grenade. Pulling the pin could injure everyone in the blast radius, including herself. But the weight of it was already unbearable. To know that Trina, a sweet, strong young woman she admired, was living a fundamental falsehood. To know that Curtis, a man she considered a friend, was being denied the truth of his own paternity, or lack thereof. It felt grotesquely unfair. It echoed every injustice she had ever railed against. Yet, was it her truth to tell? This was the question that tortured her. She was not an innocent party. She was a notorious meddler. A woman whose own past was a ledger of interference and exposure. The town had barely forgiven her for her last round of secret spilling. If she involved herself in this, she would be painted as the villain all over again, regardless of her motives. She would be destroying lives, and in the process likely destroy her own hard-won peace. She thought of Portia's face, the fear in her hurried exit. She wasn't just hiding a secret. She was living in terror of its exposure. The pressure must be crushing. Tracy's price for silence would be a lifelong burden of debt and threat. For 3 days, Nina moved through her life like a ghost. She attended meetings at Crimson, she had dinners with Sonny, she played with Wiley, but her mind was elsewhere, trapped in that sun-drenched study with a manila folder. She watched Portia across the hospital courtyard, laughing with epiphany, and saw not a confident doctor but a woman balancing on a razor's edge. She saw Trina hugging Curtis outside Kelly's, and felt a pang of such profound sorrow it stole her breath. The secret began to whisper to her in quiet moments. Tell Curtis. Free him from the lie. Give Trina her true identity. The Courtemains have enough secrets. They don't get to bury this one. It was the voice of her old self, the crusading, impulsive Nina who believed in dramatic scorched earth truth. But another voice, newer, wiser, scarred, answered back. This is not your battle. This will cause unimaginable pain. You will lose your daughter again. You will be reviled. Let Tracy handle it. Let the people involved find their own way to the truth in their own time. The conflict was tearing her apart. She found herself driving to the address of the blackmailer, Jr., listed on the affidavit, only to sit in her car outside a nondescript law office for an hour before driving away, sick with indecision. She thought about anonymously mailing the documents to Curtis, but the risk of traceability paralyzed her. The breaking point came unexpectedly. It was at a charity gala at the Metro Court. The room was glittering, filled with the sound of clinking glasses and idle chatter. Nina was on Sonny's arm, wearing a smile that felt plastered on. Across the room she saw Portia and Curtis dancing. Curtis looked at Portia with a soft, fond expression, his hand resting gently on her back. Portia was smiling up at him, but Nina, now hyper-attuned, saw the tension in her shoulders, the slight, forced quality of her laugh. It was a beautiful picture of a couple reconciled, a family healed. And it was a complete fiction. In that moment, the cost of the lie became viscerally clear to Nina. It wasn't just a historical fact, it was an ongoing theft. It was stealing Curtis's right to make choices based on reality. It was stealing Trina's heritage. It was forcing Portia to live a pantomime of a life, perpetually waiting for the curtain to fall. The moral calculus shifted. Keeping this secret was not neutrality, it was complicity. By staying silent, she was actively participating in the deception. She was allowing Tracy Quartermaine to use her family's wealth to perpetrate an injustice. She was valuing her own precarious peace over the fundamental truths of other people's lives. As the song ended and Curtis let Portia off the dance floor, Nina made her decision. It would be catastrophic. It would be messy. She would likely lose everything she had rebuilt. But she could not, in good conscience, carry this any longer. She waited 2 days crafting her approach. She needed to speak to Portia first. A confrontation, not an ambush. She deserved to hear it from someone who, however painfully, understood the prison of a terrible secret. She invited Portia for coffee at a quiet, out-of-the-way spot, not Kelly's. When Portia arrived, she was her usual polished self, but her eyes held a watchful wariness. "Nina, this is a nice surprise," Portia said, settling into the booth. "Is everything okay with Willow?" "Willow is fine," Nina said, her voice calm but hollow. She stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking against the porcelain. "This isn't about Willow." Portia's smile faded slightly. "Oh." Nina reached into her purse. She didn't pull out the documents, she didn't have them, but she placed Portia's citron necklace on the table between them. The pendant caught the light. Portia stared at it, her face draining of color. Her hand flew to her own throat, where the necklace usually lay. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper.